My name is Lucas. I'm 14 years old, and I live in a small town where everyone knows everyone's business. My family, though, had a secret, one that no one ever spoke about openly, but that all of us understood as the only way to prove we were truly part of the family. It all started with my older brother, Sean. He was the first to go through the trial, the tradition that had been passed down for generations. I remember watching him return from it like it was yesterday. His face was pale, his lips cracked from the cold, and his eyes were wild, but he was a hero in our family's eyes. He had survived the trial, one of the few who did. That night, he was celebrated with a feast, and we all stood around, clapping as he retold the details of how he'd fought off wild animals, endured freezing temperatures, and walked for miles just to make it back home. His frostbitten fingers were seen as badges of honor, and his bruised body, a symbol of his strength. But that night, I didn't feel proud. I felt terrified. The tradition was simple, but brutal. When a child turned 13, they were abandoned in the wilderness, far from home. No food, no water, and no way to contact anyone. It was meant to be a test of survival. The only rule was, don't seek help. Not from strangers, not from the authorities, and certainly not from your own family. If you did, you were considered weak, and you would be exiled from the family for life. No exceptions. You were erased from history, as if you had never existed, and no one spoke of you again. I remember hearing the whispers of my father, a former military man who enforced the rules with a strictness that terrified me. He would often remind us about the importance of the trial, how it had been done by his father and his father before that. It was sacred. If you failed, you were dead to us. I was preparing for my own trial. I had been for the past year. My father had taken me out into the woods, teaching me survival techniques, how to build a shelter from nothing, how to start a fire with just a couple of sticks, and how to survive on the smallest rations. He even made me practice deprivation, water fast, sleep deprivation, walking miles with rocks in my backpack to build my endurance. It wasn't just about physical strength, it was about mental toughness too. The look in his eyes when he told me how he had survived his own trial made me want to believe it was all worth it, that it would make me stronger. But deep down, I knew I was preparing for something that could break me. Sean had survived, and I was expected to do the same. My father never mentioned it, but I knew that if I failed, I would be disowned, erased from everything. The thought of it made my heart race, made my hands tremble when I thought about the day the trial would come. It was always the same: survive or be forgotten. And I was determined to survive. But as the day grew closer, a strange unease settled over me. There were things I never said, things I never could. I was scared, not of the wilderness, not of the hunger or the cold, but of the possibility that I wouldn't make it back, and that no one would care. That was about 5 weeks ago. The day my trial was supposed to begin was today. I stood in front of my family, pretending like I was ready, pretending like it didn't terrify me. They all smiled and patted my back, even my father, who gave me one last look before turning his gaze back to my mother. She didn't seem concerned, just proud in that quiet way she always was. My heart pounded in my chest, and I forced myself to breathe, to smile as I accepted their congratulations. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something bigger than just the trial was happening, something I couldn't quite understand. And when my father told me the trial would begin at sunset, I couldn't stop the chill that ran down my spine. It was time. It was my geography teacher, Mrs. Porter, who first made me question everything. I was 12 years old when I started noticing the looks she gave me in class. At first, I thought I was imagining things. She seemed like she was concerned for me, but I was just another kid in her class, right? It started when I stayed after school one day to ask for help with a project. She was kind and patient, but there was something different about the way she looked at me as she handed me the map for my assignment. It wasn't pity, but understanding. "I've been reading about survival techniques," I'd said casually, unsure why I mentioned it. My father had pushed me to read everything I could to prepare for my trial. "Oh," she replied, raising an eyebrow. "That sounds interesting. What kind of survival are you learning about?" I had explained, half proudly, about the tradition my family followed, how my father trained me in survival skills for the day of my trial. Mrs. Porter didn't ask a lot of questions, but her eyes narrowed a little, and her lips pressed together like she was thinking deeply. The next week, when she handed back my graded assignments, I noticed something strange in my folder, a small slip of paper. It was a list of articles with helpline numbers scrawled on the back. It took me a moment to understand what it was. The articles were about child endangerment, about children surviving in dangerous situations. And then there were the numbers, anonymous helplines for anyone in danger. I didn't understand at first. My family's tradition was sacred, wasn't it? It was about survival, about proving our strength, about protecting the family. But then I looked at the numbers again. The words danger, trauma, and rescue stood out. Mrs. Porter had left me a message, a simple one, written neatly at the bottom of the page. "If you ever need help, these people will listen." I felt my heart race. What was she trying to say? I never asked her about it directly, but it gnawed at me. I started reading the articles she'd slipped me. The more I read, the more my stomach twisted. I read about children abandoned by their families, left to survive on their own, like I was expected to do. And I began to understand. What my family had taught me wasn't noble, it wasn't honorable, it was dangerous. Over the next few weeks, I began to think about what I had been preparing for: the trial, the wilderness, the survival. But now I saw it differently. This wasn't a test of strength. This wasn't a rite of passage. This was abuse, plain and simple. The more I thought about it, the more it shook me. And as I looked around my family, I realized no one else seemed to see it that way. My parents were proud of Sean when he returned from his trial, frostbitten but strong. They spoke of it like it was a badge of honor. But what if Sean had died out there? What if I died out there? No one cared to ask that question. But there was something I could do, something I had to do. At family gatherings, when no one was paying attention, I began to teach my younger cousins. I told them it was just games, just fun, how to start a fire, how to identify edible plants. I pretended it was just a way to pass the time while the adults talked about the latest gossip or plans for their own trials. But I wasn't teaching them just to survive. I was teaching them to escape. I grew especially protective of Emma, my 8-year-old cousin. She was the youngest in our family, and she adored the idea of the trial. She believed it was some exciting adventure, just like everyone else in the family told her. But I knew better. I saw how easily she could be misled, how she thought this was all fun and games. One day, when the family wasn't looking, I pulled Emma aside in the backyard. I handed her my phone, discreetly loaded with a video of one of the articles Mrs. Porter had given me. It was about how children in dangerous situations could ask for help. I showed her the phone number. "You can call this if anything ever happens," I told her quietly. "If they leave you out there, you don't have to stay. You don't have to prove anything. Just call." Emma's wide eyes blinked in confusion, but I could tell she didn't fully understand. She was too young, too naive. She didn't see the danger yet, not like I did. Still, as I looked at her, something clicked inside me. I couldn't keep letting this happen. I couldn't just stand by and watch more of my cousins go through the same twisted ritual I was being prepared for. There had to be a way to break the cycle, a way to end this madness before it was too late. Mrs. Porter's words echoed in my mind. "If you ever need help." I had never felt more certain about anything in my life. I needed to help them. I needed to protect them before it was too late. And somehow, I knew it wasn't just Emma who needed saving. It was all of us. The morning of my 13th birthday was colder than usual. The air felt sharp, biting at my skin, even inside the house. I barely slept the night before, my mind running through the details of what was about to happen. I knew it was coming. My father had been preparing me for this moment for as long as I could remember, but no amount of training could prepare me for the reality of the trial. I woke up to find myself already bound in the trunk of a car. The engine rumbled as it drove, swaying left and right, and I felt the nausea build in my stomach. The sound of tires crunching over gravel let me know I was far from home, out of sight of anyone who could help. I shifted my body, trying to get some space, but the ropes were tight around my wrists. It didn't matter. The trial had officially begun. The plan was simple: escape, survive, and return home, no matter the cost. I was supposed to feel a rush of adrenaline, some deep sense of pride, but all I felt was a tightening knot in my chest. I wasn't sure what was worse: the trial itself or the fact that my father was watching, waiting for me to fail. I struggled against the ropes. My mind flashed to the lockpicking lessons he drilled into me. Step by step, I guided my fingers to the lock on the trunk. The hours spent with my father, working through his rigorous training, all led to this single moment. The lock clicked. I heard it, the sound of it opening, and I wasted no time. My heart pounded as I pushed open the trunk and pulled myself out. My legs wobbled underneath me, the cold air seeping through my clothes as I hit the ground. My hands were still tied behind my back, but I didn't stop to untie them. I stumbled forward, running on pure instinct, trying to keep my bearings. I heard the car engine cut off behind me, and then the screech of tires as my father's car sped off, leaving me alone. Alone, except for the fear, the cold, and the realization that I had to find my way home, or risk losing everything. It didn't take long before I came across a small, isolated gas station. A police officer stood by his cruiser, watching the empty road. It seemed like an opportunity to get help, but as I approached, I felt the weight of my father's unspoken rules pressing down on me. If I told the officer what was happening, if I broke the code, I would be gone. Exiled, erased from the family's history. The fear of that drove me forward, past the officer, past the help that could have saved me. I didn't even slow down. When my father finally found me hours later, I was back on the road, near a small bridge. His car screeched to a halt, and he stepped out. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with a quiet fury. "You didn't stop, did you?" he said, his voice low and controlled, but the threat was clear. I shook my head, unable to speak, my throat tight. He didn't need words to communicate. His silence said everything. He walked over to me, and for a moment, I thought he might hit me, punish me for my hesitation. But instead, he gave me a strange look, one that mixed pride with something darker. "Good. You did well," he said, his voice strangely flat. "You survived, but next time, it'll be worse." The words hung in the air like an unspoken promise. I didn't need to ask. I didn't want to know. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't the victor. I wasn't a hero. I had survived, yes, but the weight of that survival, The emptiness of it settled over me. I was celebrated. I was praised. But I was also trapped, suffocated by the rules of a family that valued survival over anything else. My father's approval wasn't a triumph. It was a chain. And as much as I tried to convince myself otherwise, the knot in my stomach told me the truth. The next trial would be even worse. I had survived, but at what cost? Thanksgiving was always a big event in our family. The house was filled with laughter, the smell of turkey and stuffing wafting through the air, and a sense of tradition that always made me uneasy. This year, however, there was something more in the air, a sense of foreboding that gnawed at me as the family buzzed with excitement. Emma's first trial was finally announced. Everyone was talking about it like it was an honor, like she was about to embark on some great adventure. My father patted her on the back, congratulating her. My mother beamed. They spoke of the trial as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I sat in silence, feeling the weight of the moment crush me. I didn't want Emma to go through this. I couldn't bear the thought of her out there, alone, just like I had been. I had spent years training for the trials, but no amount of preparation could ever make me ready for what was waiting. And now, it was Emma's turn. After the announcement, I waited for the perfect moment. When the house had quieted down, and the older cousins were playing cards and laughing in the living room, I pulled Emma aside. Her face was glowing with excitement. "You're really excited for the trial, huh?" I asked, my voice strained. She nodded eagerly, her bright eyes sparkling with anticipation. "Yeah, I can't wait to prove I can do it. It's going to be so much fun." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. She didn't know what it really meant. To her, this was just a game. I slipped my phone from my pocket and handed it to her. "Emma, if they ever leave you out there, if you're abandoned, you can't survive alone." My voice broke slightly, but I forced myself to keep going. "If anything goes wrong, you can call for help. Call 911. Just press this number." I had loaded a video onto the phone. It showed child survivor stories that explained what it meant to be abandoned, to face a trial that wasn't meant to teach survival, but to break you. I knew Emma didn't understand fully, but I needed her to have a choice. A chance. "Do you understand?" I asked quietly. Emma looked at the phone, then back at me, her brow furrowed. She didn't fully grasp the gravity of it, but I saw a flicker of confusion. She nodded anyway, as if she were simply indulging me. "Okay," she said, slipping the phone into her pocket. "I'll be careful." That was all I could hope for. The days leading up to Emma's trial felt like a nightmare. I kept an eye on her at family gatherings, watching her every move, wanting to protect her, but unable to do anything. It was out of my hands now. Thanksgiving dinner came and went, and that night, as the family continued to celebrate, I couldn't shake the dread that clung to me. Emma, still so innocent, didn't understand what was coming. A week later, the trial began. The family was as celebratory as ever. My father, ever the military man, delivered his speech about courage and loyalty. Emma, proudly wearing her bright yellow jacket, beamed with excitement as she prepared to face the wilderness. She was so eager, so ready to prove herself. The next morning, she was gone. My heart twisted in my chest as the reality hit me. She was out there, alone. I couldn't stay in the house. I had to act. Days passed, and the phone calls never came. Emma didn't call for help. She didn't do what I asked. She was determined to make it through on her own. And when she finally returned 4 days later, hypothermic and shaking, but still walking, I felt the crushing weight of failure. She was praised, celebrated as a hero, her strength being commended by everyone in the family. But the moment she walked through that door, I knew what it meant. She hadn't used the phone. She hadn't called for help. I tried to hide the devastation that burned through me. She didn't understand. She was too young, too innocent. It wasn't just the failure of the system. It was the failure of my plan. I had tried to save her, to expose the truth, but she refused. She didn't see it as betrayal. She just saw it as surviving. Later that night, alone in my room, I looked at the phone in my hand, now useless. I hadn't saved her. I hadn't broken the cycle. That's when the message came. It was from an unknown number. "I have the recordings you made. I'm watching. Don't try to expose them." I sat frozen, my heart racing. I knew exactly what this meant. Someone was watching. Someone knew about my plan. And just like that, I felt the walls closing in. The family tradition wasn't just a test of survival. It was a trap, and it was getting tighter. I arrived at the warehouse just after midnight, my heart pounding in my chest. The message had been brief, cryptic. "I know what you're trying to do. Come to the old factory at the edge of town if you want help." It was from an unknown number, but I recognized the tone. Someone was watching, waiting for me to make a move. I approached the heavy metal door and knocked twice. It creaked open, revealing Mrs. Porter, the last person I expected to find here. She smiled weakly as she ushered me inside. The faint sound of hushed voices and murmurs echoed through the dimly lit room. It was colder than I expected, and the smell of old metal and grease filled the air. "You're safe here," Mrs. Porter said softly. "We've been waiting for someone like you." I looked around, taking in the sight of the others in the room. They were adults, all scarred, both physically and emotionally. There was a woman with deep lines running down her face, and a man with an arm that seemed to have been broken at some point and never properly set. It hit me. These were survivors. People who had gone through the same horrors I was trying to escape. They weren't just victims. They were proof that survival was possible. Everyone here, Mrs. Porter continued, has survived trials of their own, just like yours. They nodded, their eyes meeting mine, some faces sad, others resigned. There was a unity between them, something I hadn't seen before, not even in my own family. Why are you all here? I asked, feeling the need to understand. We've been watching your family for years. A man with a thick beard spoke up. His voice was low, raspy. We've been waiting for someone who might finally stand up, break the cycle. Someone who could fight back. I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of it all. They had been watching me and my family. Mrs. Porter stepped closer to me. I know this is a lot to process, but we need you. We can help you. Help your cousins, your family, break free from this tradition. The words hung in the air, heavy and full of possibility. How? I managed to whisper. How do I break this? You don't have to do it alone, the bearded man said again. We've gathered information. We've been tracking every trial, every survivor. We've seen the pattern. We've also seen the consequences. Mrs. Porter added softly. I don't want to see you end up like those who didn't make it. The weight of their words pressed down on me. But there was something else there too. Hope. They had the knowledge, the experience. Maybe they could help me save Emma. Save all of us. As they discussed next steps, my mind raced. I thought about the phone I had given Emma. She hadn't used it, hadn't broken the family's rules. And I understood why. It was too ingrained in her. She believed in the trial. She believed in the family's twisted version of honor. If I had truly wanted to save her, I had to make her see the truth. Before anyone could say anything more, the door opened suddenly, and a man stepped inside. His eyes immediately locked on me, and something in his stance made me freeze. It was my father. His expression was unreadable, but I knew what it meant. He had followed me. How had he found me so quickly? You've been busy, Lucas, my father said, his voice a cold whisper. Too busy for your family. You've gotten yourself tangled up in something dangerous. I froze, caught between the relief of being with the survivors and the crushing weight of fear. My father's presence was suffocating. You're mentally unstable, he continued, his voice still cold. This group, they're just using you. They'll twist your mind into something else, turn you against your family. My breath hitched. He was here. He was twisting everything, just like always. I tried to explain, to tell him about the truth I had found, about the survivors who had been through the same horrors. But when I spoke, my words came out wrong, rushed, frantic. To anyone else, I probably looked crazy. The survivors exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the tension. My father turned to them with a smug smile, his eyes narrowing. You all are enabling him, he said, his voice full of disgust. He doesn't need saving. He needs help. Real help. I couldn't believe this was happening. My own father, in front of the people who had been through worse than I ever could imagine, was trying to convince them I was the problem. Mrs. Porter stepped forward, her voice calm and firm. Lucas is not the one who needs help. He's trying to save others, something your family has never allowed. A man beside her nodded. Your tradition? It's a cycle of abuse. It needs to end. Enough. My father snapped, his face red with anger. You don't know what you're dealing with. But before he could continue, one of the survivors, the woman with the scars on her arms, took a step forward. We know more than you think, and we're not backing down. The tension in the room was unbearable. My father's presence was like a wall, pushing everything back, and I, caught between the hope of something better and the suffocating fear of my father's manipulations, felt more trapped than ever. He turned his eyes on me, the warning clear. You'll regret this, Lucas. I will make sure of it. As he left the room, I felt the cold, suffocating grip of his control around me again. But in the midst of the chaos, there was something else growing inside me, a defiance. A belief that maybe, just maybe, I could break free. But my father had already set his plan in motion, and with him came the promise of a war that I wasn't sure I could win. My father's plan was working. I could feel it tightening around me like a vice. It had started slowly, with small manipulations, distorted stories in the family, a few whispers in the hallways of my school, a sly comment here or there. But it escalated, fast. It all began with the videos. Edited footage of me teaching my cousins survival skills, disguised as games, was uploaded to social media, and soon, the word dangerous was attached to everything I did. The videos, twisted to make it look like I was training them for something violent, were everywhere. People who had never spoken to me now gave me fearful glances. At school, teachers treated me like a problem child. I wasn't Lucas anymore. I was unstable. My boss at the part-time job I had after school pulled me aside, concern written all over his face. Lucas, we need to talk, he said, his voice shaking. People are worried. You can't just go teaching your cousins these survival things. It's illegal, you know? I was suffocating. Every attempt I made to explain myself only seemed to make things worse. No one believed me, not even my closest friends. They'd seen the footage, the accusations. They couldn't understand that I wasn't what they thought I was. It was like I was becoming a ghost. No one saw the real me anymore, just the image my father had painted. Then, the next blow came when I tried to retrieve the hospital records that could prove Emma had been seriously hurt. Her injuries were undeniable. She had been drugged, abandoned, and returned to us broken. I had tried to get a hold of her medical files to expose my family for what they were, But when I broke into the hospital's records office, it only reinforced my father's narrative. I was caught immediately. A nurse found me rummaging through the paperwork and called security. My heart dropped into my stomach as I was escorted out, humiliated. The hospital released a statement that painted me as a troublemaker, an unstable young man on the verge of a breakdown. Desperate for help, I turned to Mrs. Porter, the only person who had ever believed in me. But the pressure from my father was too much. He had somehow managed to convince her that she needed to back off. Her daughter's medical care was being threatened, blackmail, nothing more, and Mrs. Porter reluctantly withdrew her support. I sat in my room that night, feeling the walls close in. Every attempt I had made to expose the truth, to break the cycle of abuse, had backfired. No one believed me. No one was on my side anymore. My father had successfully isolated me from everyone, including the one person who had ever shown me a way out. But there was something else in me, something deep down, that refused to give up. Even as my world crumbled, I clung to the idea of freedom, of breaking away from the suffocating grip of my family's twisted tradition. But the more I thought about it, the more hopeless it seemed. I was losing time. The noose was tightening, and I had no idea how to escape. The final blow came when I found out that my father was pushing for me to be committed. He was framing me as dangerous, mentally unstable, someone who couldn't be trusted to live outside of institutional care. The walls were closing in. The life I had known, the one where I had some semblance of control, was slipping away. My father was systematically stripping me of everything, piece by piece. And soon, there would be nothing left to fight for. I was running out of time. I never thought I'd be digging through my grandmother's attic. But there I was, crouched under a dusty old beam, sifting through boxes of forgotten family photos and papers. I wasn't looking for memories. I was searching for something that could break the curse my family had bound me to, something that could finally expose the truth. The air was thick with dust, and my eyes burned as I flipped through the yellowing photographs. There were pictures of my father when he was younger, smiling with a look I barely recognized. But I wasn't interested in those. What I was looking for was far darker. The attic had been a place of mystery, a place I had avoided my whole life. But now, it was my only hope. As I dug deeper, I came across a stack of old letters. My fingers trembled as I opened the top one, the paper brittle in my hands. It was a letter from my father's mother, my grandmother, to a woman named Sarah. The contents were brief, but they stopped me cold. It spoke of a girl named Lily, who had failed the trial, and whose name was erased from family history. There was also mention of a girl named Sarah and another, Helen, children who had vanished from the family's memory. I felt a chill. My grandmother had known. She had known about the tradition long before I ever did. As I sifted through more papers, I found a series of coded notes. Recipes, my grandmother had called them, but they were anything but. These recipes listed locations, names, and instructions, guidelines for where and how to find the erased children. There was even a map. The realization hit me hard. There were others, people like me, who had been cast aside, forgotten, and some of them might still be alive. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as the pieces began to fall into place. My father's abusive upbringing, the trauma that he never talked about, had shaped this entire tradition. This wasn't just a practice of survival. It was a cycle of pain, one that had been passed down from generation to generation. The tradition had its roots in something far deeper, something darker. My father had been trained to do this, to abandon, to erase. And now, he was doing it to me, to my cousins. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself. The weight of it was suffocating. I needed to act, but time was running out. As I continued reading, a new thought struck me. My mother, always so quiet, had been communicating with someone behind my father's back. A faint memory flashed in my mind, her telling me that she had contacted Helen, the woman who might be ready to break free. I didn't understand it fully at the time, but now, it seemed more important than ever. Helen could be the key to exposing everything. But it wasn't just the family's history that was slipping through my fingers. It was my own future. I felt the tightening noose of my father's control more than ever. The upcoming conservatorship hearing was my last chance to make a stand. It had to be now. I made a plan. I knew I couldn't do this alone, and I wasn't sure how much time I had left before my father fully isolated me. But I had a feeling that with Helen's help, we might be able to break this cycle, this family's curse, once and for all. The truth was no longer a secret hidden in the dark corners of the attic. It was the key to my survival, and to saving my cousins from a fate they didn't deserve. But the walls were closing in. My father was already plotting his next move. If I didn't act fast, he would succeed in silencing me forever. The courtroom was suffocating. The air was thick with tension as my father sat across from me, his cold eyes never leaving mine. The walls felt like they were closing in, the weight of the lies he had built pressing down on my chest. My father had orchestrated the perfect narrative. I was unstable, paranoid, dangerous. He painted me as a threat, and with every word he spoke, the courtroom believed him a little more. His voice was smooth, convincing, a practiced act of manipulation. He even had the audacity to call me a lost cause, someone who needed professional help, not freedom. And I felt myself shrinking under the weight of it all. Teachers, family members, and even neighbors were called to testify against me. Each one, from my old schoolmates to the distant relatives who barely knew me, spoke as if they understood my inner turmoil better than I did. The weight of their words hit me like a hammer. Even my mother, at first, had gone along with it, her eyes wide with fear, her voice shaky. "Lucas has always been unpredictable," she said, her voice trembling. "We were just trying to help him find his way." It felt like a slap in the face. She was my mother, and yet here she was, throwing me under the bus because of her own fear of what my father would do if she stood up for me. But as the trial went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was slipping away. My father had manipulated all of us, me, my mother, my cousins, even the legal system, into a web of lies, and no one seemed to care enough to see through it. I felt the rage building inside me, but I couldn't speak. If I said one wrong thing, it could cost me everything. Then, at the breaking point, something unexpected happened. My grandmother stood up and walked into the courtroom, holding a folder in her hands. It was the same folder I had found in her attic, the one with the photos, the letters, the secrets. Her face was stoic, but there was a quiet resolve in her step that made me feel, for the first time in months, like there was hope. With a heavy sigh, she handed the folder to the judge, who looked at it curiously. I couldn't help but feel a spark of hope as my father's expression faltered for a second. He looked at her, his face hardening, as if he knew what she was about to do. "Your Honor," my grandmother began, her voice steady, "I've brought proof that my son's tradition has gone on far too long. These are the records of children who failed his trials. Children who were erased from the family. Some of them may still be alive." The room fell silent. I felt a surge of adrenaline in my veins. My grandmother continued, flipping through the papers, showing pictures of the children my father had cast aside. There were names, Lily, Sarah, and Helen, and a chilling note written by my grandmother herself. They did not survive. They were forgotten, but I never stopped looking for them. Then, my mother stood, her hands trembling as she held up a hidden camera footage on a tablet. The footage was from the woods, the same footage that had recorded Emma's trial. The footage that showed her nearly dying in the woods, in freezing temperatures, and not once did she seek help. My father's face turned ashen, his grip tightening on the edge of the table. "Your Honor, I didn't," he began, but the words faltered in his throat. The judge looked at the evidence, at my father, and then back to the courtroom. "This is disturbing," he said. "What kind of family tradition would result in these children being abandoned, injured, or worse?" The trial shifted. The focus turned from me to my father, and the more evidence was presented, the more his world crumbled around him. He couldn't hide from the truth anymore. The wall he'd built to protect himself, to keep us all trapped in his control, finally began to crack. Then, the final blow came. Trail camera footage from Emma's trial, the one that had haunted me ever since she came back, was shown to the courtroom. It was clear as day. Emma, alone in the woods, almost freezing to death. The evidence was undeniable. My father's defense crumbled. His manipulation had worked for so long, but not anymore. In that moment, as I watched my father's facade shatter in front of everyone, I felt the weight of years of fear, shame, and suffocation lift off my chest. The truth was finally out. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, but for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. The cycle of abuse, the twisted tradition my father had enforced, was about to end. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with tension as the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. My father, sitting rigidly in his chair, was no longer the powerful figure who had controlled everything in my life. His facade was cracking, piece by piece, as the weight of his actions began to unfold before everyone in the room. Child Protective Services had removed all of the younger cousins from the family's custody. I heard the faint whispers, the quiet murmurs of the courtroom, as people began to understand the depth of the abuse. But the moment that hit hardest was when my father was taken into custody. He had sat there, so proud, convinced that he could continue manipulating everyone. But now he was a broken man, his pride shattered. For the first time, I saw him collapse. Emotionally, physically, everything that had once held him together crumbled in an instant. He wasn't the proud, invincible father anymore. He was just a man broken by the weight of his own crimes, and the weight of what he had done to his own children. "Please," he said, his voice cracking, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and disbelief. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It wasn't the apology I'd been waiting for. It wasn't a real apology. It was desperation, a last-ditch attempt to save himself. But I had no more sympathy for him. I had spent my life fighting for his approval, bending myself into something I wasn't just to survive. Now, it was his turn to face the consequences. As he was led away in handcuffs, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. The tradition was over. My father, who had terrorized us for so long, was finally being held accountable. But even as my father was arrested, something deep inside me still ached. It was the emptiness of the years I'd lost, the years that could never be reclaimed. The lives of my erased siblings, Helen, Sarah, and Lily, flooded my mind. They hadn't been given a chance to survive, to grow. They had been erased, and I would never truly know what happened to them. They were victims of a cruel cycle that no one ever spoke of, no one ever dared to break. But now, there was hope. Helen, Sarah, and Lily, they had all returned. They were alive, and they had come back to reclaim the children they had lost. It was a small victory, but it was the first step toward healing. I saw Helen standing there, looking more like the mother figure she had become over the years than the scared child who had once fled the trial. She had done it. She had broken free. When the judge finally looked at me, his expression softened. "Lucas, you are not guilty of any crime. Your father, however, is a different story. He wasn't wrong. My father's crimes were many, and it was his turn to face the truth. But I wasn't free from the weight of my own choices, my own involvement in the twisted tradition that had held me captive for so long. Still, the truth was finally out, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe again. The years of emotional abuse, the manipulation, and the endless tests were finally behind me. In the aftermath of the trial, the family home was abandoned. The place that had once been a symbol of control and fear now left to rot. I had spent so many years fearing that house, that tradition, but now, it was just a shell, and I was free. I was cleared of all wrongdoing. And although I wasn't sure what came next, I knew one thing. I wasn't going back to that house. I wasn't going back to that life, and neither were my cousins. Helen took me in, offering me a place to stay, a place to heal. And as we all began to rebuild, the memory of the tradition, the years of abuse disguised as a test, slowly faded, replaced by something stronger, a real family. A chosen family, built on love and safety, not fear and endurance. The tradition was over. The cycle was broken, and we would never go back. 2 years had passed since everything changed. The house I used to live in, the place that had held so many memories, both good and bad, was now a distant echo. The tradition was gone, the cycle finally broken. I stood outside a modest therapy center, my hands shoved in the pockets of my jacket as I watched the door. Inside, Emma was taking her first real steps toward healing. I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had been through so much, but she was stronger now. I walked in, the sound of a soft bell ringing as I entered. Emma sat on the couch, smiling up at me. She was no longer the excited, naive girl who had once thought the trials were just another adventure. She had learned the truth, as had we all. "How's it going?" I asked gently, sitting down beside her. Emma's smile was hesitant, but it was real. "I'm doing okay," she said, her voice quieter than it used to be. "It's hard, but I don't have to pretend anymore." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. She didn't have to pretend anymore. Neither did I, and neither did any of us. Helen, Sarah, and Lily were here too, each of them having found their own path to healing, their own ways to process the horrors we had endured. Helen, in particular, had become a beacon of stability and hope for all of us. She had taken the reins after everything collapsed. She was the one who had fought hardest to protect us all. It wasn't easy, of course. We still had days when the past crept in, when the weight of what we had gone through would feel heavy. But we were a family now, not defined by survival, not bound by fear. We had built something new, something grounded in care, not endurance. And it felt real. I had plans too, real plans for my future. College was on the horizon. Helen had helped me prepare, guiding me not just through the application process, but also through what it meant to build a life beyond all the trauma. I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving, and I was going to make sure no one ever had to go through what we did again. I had joined the Survivor Network, a collective of people who, like us, had survived the unthinkable. We were working together, openly now, to help children escape cycles of abuse. Our story was no longer something to be hidden or whispered about. It was our strength, our power, and we would use it to protect others. I looked at Emma again, her face soft with the peace she was finally finding. "You're going to be okay," I told her. She smiled, her eyes bright with something new, a flicker of real hope. "I know, and I'm going to help others too." We weren't just healing, we were building something new, something better. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the weight of the tradition on my shoulders. I didn't feel trapped in the past. I was free. We were all free. And that freedom, real, earned, and built from the ground up, was worth everything. As I left the therapy center, I thought about how far we had come. The world outside felt different, brighter somehow. We had rebuilt a real family, one grounded in safety, love, and care. The old tradition, with all its pain and suffering, was no more. Now, we could finally live, and we would make sure that the cycle of fear and endurance would never return.